This is Joe Walensky presenting a module for TWRT 291 Technical Communication in the Workplace. This is SEO, Search Engine Optimization, and Metadata. The importance of tagging and indexing content for search engine optimization. Well, I don't think that it's a surprise to anyone that information that is present on the web is probably the single most visible and actively used way of distributing information today. And if we're not necessarily publishing content, we're certainly consuming it. But we are talking in this class about you as being publishers of content. And so getting information so that it's visible on the public web is one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about. So, of course, if you are able to develop a web page and then you distribute the address of that page, then people will be able to view that information. Of course, that means that you have to have some type of manual way to get it out to all the people that may be interested in it. Of course, Google has dramatically changed how this works, and if information is available to Google, it will then make it available to the rest of the world. However, in order for that to happen, you have to first have your information on the public web. That means that it has to be resident on a file server that is not behind a firewall, that's not protected by security, that's essentially open so that Google is able to find that information, store links to it in its database, and then be able to direct other people to it. So one of the first questions you have to ask yourself is whether your information is on a public-facing server. For some UW content, some of it is on a public-facing server, and we can all see it whether we're students and faculty or not. Other information is specifically for people within the UW system. So technically it's not on a public web, it's on what we call an intranet. Now, when you're developing content to publish to the web, you also have to be thinking about the way that that information is prepared and formatted, because Google is really good about looking into files and finding what kind of information is there, but certain kinds of files are easier for it to work with than others. So, for example, if you're using standard web technologies like HTML and CSS, then Google will be able to find that information just fine. If you're using PDF formats, that's also a format that Google is pretty good at being able to index and make visible on the web. But occasionally there's some problems with that, and you might have to check to make sure if your PDFs are properly found by Google. Where you run into problems are proprietary formats, and for most students that's not an issue. But if something isn't prepared in a web standard format, it can be hard for Google to be able to process that information. Now, one of the key elements for us as publishers is to make sure that our information is visible on Google. And it may not be quite as easy as you think it is. So sometimes it works out that way, other times not. But let's take an example. Let's say that I wanted to be able to, let's say I was making a calendar in Google Calendar, and I wanted to print out that Google Calendar. Well, if I type print a Google Calendar into my web browser using Google search, what you see is on this screen right here. So it does come up with information about how to accomplish that task. And so it has the steps. All you have to do is, and then step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But notice the author of this information. How to print your Google Calendar by theguru.com. Well, I mean, that's kind of interesting. It seems like it's the right procedure, but I've never heard of guru.com. Are they really qualified to present this information? I'm not really sure. There is a link to Google's information about how to print your calendar, but it's second on the list. And one of the things we know from our own searching on Google is that the things that get clicked on the most are the ones that are on the first page and at the top of the first page. So Google's solution is actually second on the page. It's not the primary. And the reason for that probably has to do something with search engine optimization. There's something about what the other topic is doing in terms of its writing or its metadata that is making that get to the top of the list. But at least we do see Google's solution on there. Now let's take a closer look at that. If we look at Google's solution, print your calendar, yep, in fact, that's what we're looking for, and it's basically the same solution as what's provided by guru.com. Let's try a different type of a calendar. Let's say that I was interested in the iCal calendar format, which is common on the Apple Mac OS X operating system. So let's type in print, and I guess I should have said Mac OS 10, but that's changing to Mac OS pretty soon. But let's say we go into Google or Safari and type print an iCal calendar. This is what you would see, at least this is what I found with a recent search for print an iCal calendar. We'll look at the items that appear here. You actually have to go all the way down to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th item to find something from Apple at all. And you know, in fact, that actually doesn't answer the question. So the one item that is there at the bottom isn't directly related to what we're looking for. There's another item there under discussions.apple.com. That's not really the solution either. Actually, that top hit is the best solution, how to print calendars with iCal YouTube, so the one right up at the top. And if you go into that, it's a YouTube video that does give the solution to this, put together by some person named Ruth Davis. Now, I'm sure Ruth has put together a great video, but I don't know who Ruth is. In a way, it's interesting that Ruth has the top hit and Apple is not able to do that. So even a company like Apple, in every case, is not able to necessarily drive their information to the very top of the list. And here's that YouTube example. One more example. Let's say we want to print a calendar in Microsoft's Outlook. So in my search browser, I type print a calendar in Outlook, and this is what comes up in Google. And notice what happens here. All of the top hits on the first page are by Microsoft on their Office.com site. So apparently Microsoft is doing something that makes sure that its content is elevated to the very top of the list, and they are the correct solutions as well. So it does make sense to pay attention to how you put your information together and how Google is indexing it, because ideally you want your information to be at the very top of the list. Now, first of all, I want to just digress for a moment and talk about how Google search works. You may or not be familiar with it, but the first thing that goes on is that Google has software that is traveling up and down fiber optic cables throughout the world to find servers everywhere and look inside those servers at all the files and look inside all those files and consume that content. It essentially grabs it, stores it with brute force, and tries to make sense of it with smart algorithms. And all of this massive amount of data is in server farms. And so one of them is not too far from the University of Washington along the Columbia River in the Dalles. And there's a photo there. Essentially, we don't really have any people working at these places. They're just dark cold buildings filled with computer hardware that's storing the world's data. Now that data in and of itself isn't very useful, but then Google uses some very smart, sophisticated software to make relationships between the information, and then they have what I call a secret sauce for ranking content. So they have certain algorithms that determine how things get to the top of a particular page. And then when you put in information as a search query, that's then matched against this index that Google's software has put together and gives you a list of results in your browser. So how do you get high-ranking content? Well, Google doesn't say for sure what it takes to do that because they want to avoid people using that for spam purposes. But first of all, just by being the author of the content, you're putting out the best version of your content, and so it is real. And so search engines like Google are good at sniffing out whether something sounds like it's spam or not. And as technical writers, we do very comprehensive, clear, and concise information. And Google software recognizes that as being a high level of content, and therefore will, as one of its ranking factors, give that higher points and push that upward. Also, for any given topic, if we're the expert on it, we're writing about it, then we know the nomenclature. We know the type of terminology that's appropriate for our topic. Google is able to sniff that out. If other people are linking to our content because they found it helpful, that's a very positive sign. And I've given you two links, one to Google Webmaster Guidelines, where Google does talk in general terms about what you need to do to be able to get your information ranked highly. And then I also give a third-party list that just shows some anecdotal evidence of what people have found as affecting information getting to the top of the Google lists. Now, in addition to developing good content, which should be your main focus, we also do have to pay attention to metadata because metadata helps Google make sense of documents. And metadata is information about your information. It's information that is attached to your content but hidden from view. And so Google software can find it as it indexes your content. And it just makes it easier for Google to make sense of it. So for example, you have the title and meta title tags, or I'm sorry, you have the title of your document, but there's also the meta title, which is hidden in code inside a web page. And that information is used by Google. You can also include a description of your content that's a meta tag that is also part of the markup for a particular page. Now, for those pieces of information, you have to hope that your software is appropriately putting those into the code of your content before you deliver it to the web. And different tools do that in different ways. Most tools will at least put the title into your web-based code. Whether or not they do a description is a separate issue. In addition to the metadata, the level at which you've set your headings makes a difference. So formatting with heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 helps Google add meaning. It looks at the markup, underlying markup code of your web page to identify what information is at what heading level. It's also possible to add in keywords, and we'll do an exercise about adding in keywords that provide additional information about your particular content. And then finally, content blocks. You may have additional tags that you're adding to the information. A lot of social media allows you to add special proprietary tags, and that information also can be used to be able to index your information properly. Uh, Here's a sample SEO guidelines for my internet service provider. They gave this to me as a customer, and this isn't necessarily the for sure rules. As I mentioned, Google doesn't say exactly what the specific rules are, but here's some guidelines, and you can kind of look through those and see what catches your eye. But for example, for proper description tags, I mentioned that they should be between 25 and 35 words in length. And so, in other words, you don't want to have several paragraphs worth of content, but also you want to have more than 3 or 4 words. So, proper description tag of that length when embedded in your document will help Google to be able to find it. Now, when people are searching for information, they're going to be using keywords. And so if you can embed those kind of keywords into your document, of course, that can be helpful for search engines to be able to find your information. So to experiment with this, I've given you a link to a tool called SEMrush, which is a free tool which provides the ability to look up individual keywords. And so, for example, you can type in something that is of particular interest to you. For example, I like to paddle in my kayak, so I'm going to type in kayaking. And now I'm going to get some results about that. And interesting thing about using kayaking. Well, there happens to be a very popular travel site called kayak.com. And actually, kayak.com ends up essentially appropriating that keyword. And so that's something that you have to be aware of when you're thinking about using keywords, because you don't want to have the search engine come up with the wrong meaning for what you're interested in. Now, there are other keywords that are related to that, and you can find then sites that are using some of those keywords. And so they're all listed below in this area. If I go back to SEMrush, I could put in a different type of a keyword like gardening. And so I can get a keyword overview of gardening, and you can see how that word is used in terms of different spellings for it. If you look over at the right, related keywords, notice that there's some misspellings there. That's always interesting. You can see what people had put in where the misspellings still were then people were directed to the appropriate place. I can go to look at the full report for gardening, and it's going to show me some of the ways that the top keywords were used for that particular report. Now, this tool is not, it has a free trial to it, but it's not an unlimited trial. And so you're able to do, something like 10 or 20 searches, I think, before it locks you out from having to pay to be able to use the tool. And then after a period of time, you'll be able to go back and get more information or to use it again. So what I wanted you to do then for your practical writing exercise is to take a look at your hiking safety document. So this is a publication that we did a couple of weeks ago during visual design. And so open up your safety document and review the content. Take a look at it. Think about what kind of information would you'd be able to provide that potentially would make it easier for Google to be able to find that document if it was posted on the web. And so there's a couple things I wanted you to do. First of all is to write a description tag for the document. So essentially, this is that short description, maybe 20 to 35 words, that encapsulates all of the most important things about that hiking safety document. So in a way, you could think of it as an abstract, an executive summary. I guess if you already had an abstract or an executive summary for the document, you could probably just use that as long as it wasn't too long. But that's one of the items that you should do is put together a paragraph which very clearly identifies what's in that hiking safety document. And then I want you to come up with your own list of 10 keywords. So these are words that people might be using when they search if they were looking for this hiking safety document. So you're going to have to put yourself in the mind of your potential audience. What keywords would they use to be able to get to your document? You could test your keywords in SEMrush, and if you do that, you're probably going to find some related keywords to give you more information. And so for this practical writing assignment, what I'd like you to do is take your description tag and your 10 keywords and post those into the practical writing metadata discussion. And that's how you will get your participation point for that. All right, that brings us to the conclusion of this session on SEO metadata. Thank you.